JG Ballard's works are extremely important in the canon of SF, science fiction, though I think it'd be better to call him a writer of speculative or dystopic fiction. And here we go. I suspect that the great writers of the future will be out-and-out mavericks, like Genet and Burroughs, genuinely people of the fringe. Our perception of serious fiction may have to change. I think that the serious novel in the future will be serious in the sense that Hitchcock's films are serious, and not in the way that Mrs. Dalloway or Middlemarch are serious. The psychological drama will migrate from inside the characters' heads to the settings that surround them. Hitchcock's films demonstrate this well. It's also truer to real life, where we usually have very little idea of what is going on inside people's heads, but are extremely sensitive to the atmosphere around them. So said JG Ballard, the great speculative writer of fiction, sometimes considered a science fiction author, who, perhaps more than any other author I've read, presented a nightmare vision of the modern world, which is proved to be more prophetic with every day. His early works, like The Drowned World, always focus around a kind of catastrophic event that has affected the world. In The Drowned World, this was written long before the kind of inconvenient truth era of global warming awareness. He wrote a book in which the polar ice caps had melted, creating massive worldwide flooding, creating a tropical Earth that is overwrought with verdant vegetation, and the living survivors are kind of navigating through this swampy world, which is actually more of a psychological metaphor. His landscapes were inner landscapes, and as you descended into Ballard's work, you'd really be descending into the minds of the protagonists, in which you would find these very poignant fragments of postmodern thinking that describe a terrifying vision of the modern world. Another one of his early novels, The Crystal World, describes a kind of phenomenon in which organic life is being crystallized, and this crystallization is spreading forth from the jungle. Now, on one level, this is science fiction, dystopic fiction. It's an adventure, a race against time. But on the other hand, it's more of a condition, psychological condition. JG Ballard is probably most well known for his autobiographical, semi-autobiographical novel, Empire of the Sun, which came out in 1984 and was made into a film by Steven Spielberg starring a very young Christian Bale in 1986. The story recounts his time in a Japanese internment camp. He was born in Shanghai to diplomat British parents, and was there for the invasion of China by the Japanese. And the actual story is, he was placed in an internment camp with his family, and I believe he stayed there about a year or two. The major change between his real life experience and the storyline in the book is that he's separated from his parents in the book and is forced to make his own way through the difficult conditions of the internment camp. What makes it an interesting book in comparison to other World War II literature is that, we're seeing this through the eyes of a young boy. And his experiences are joyous at times. He's still learning to have fun. He's still making connections, almost unaware of the war-torn world around him. Most of the adults are obviously very concerned and very aware of the danger they're in. But there's a kind of innocence to his story, a coming of age that is beautiful, and probably the most sentimental of Ballard's books. In many ways, it's unlike any other book he's written, and can kind of give you a wrong idea of what he's about as an author, especially if you've only seen the film or read only Empire of the Sun. Excellent book, worth checking out, but today we're going to be focusing more on his controversial 60s novel, Crash. In my opinion, Crash is the finest book to ever take upon the subject of technology, the consequences of technology on us as human beings, the consequences of dependence upon technology. The book follows a group of car crash obsessees. They have fetishized car crashes. They document car crashes, the wounds suffered in car crashes, with the excitement of a pervert with a new porn. They're more than just sexually turned on by the car crash. They're intellectually titillated by it. They're thrilled by the car crash. They pore over famous car crashes, the deaths of Albert Camus, of James Dean. They even go as far as recreating some of these car crashes for their own amusement. The main character is named James Ballard, and that's no accident, though this is not precisely an autobiographical novel. JG Ballard was in a pretty severe car accident, and I believe that may have planted the seed for the novel Crash in his head, though it was worked out in earlier writings of his, particularly in the Atrocity exhibition, which is a far more disjointed experimental novel. There are scenes in the Atrocity exhibition where you can see the seeds of Crash germinating and coming to fruition. The leader of this kind of car crash cult is a man named Vaughn, described as the nightmare angel of the highways. We start the book off knowing that Vaughn's died, finally, in a terrible car crash. The first line is, "Vaughn died yesterday in his last car crash," which is a gripping first line. It just pulls you right into the work. And what follows for the next 200 and so pages is a mystifying, hallucinatory journey into the depths of human degradation. The car crash becomes a symbolic metaphor for sexual release. The vehicle itself is described in all of its contours the way that one might describe a body that they desire. In a sense, the cars are extensions of the characters themselves. I'm going to just read a really lovely line here. Thinking of Vaughn now, drowning in his own blood under the police arc lights, I remember the countless imaginary disasters he described as we cruised together along the airport expressways. He dreamed of ambassadorial limousines crashing into jackknifing butane tankers, of taxis filled with celebrating children colliding head-on below the bright display windows of deserted supermarkets. He dreamed of alienated brothers and sisters by chance meeting each other on collision courses on the access roads of petrochemical plants, their unconscious incest made explicit in this colliding metal, and the hemorrhages of their brain tissue flowering beneath the aluminized compression chambers and reaction vessels. I mean, the writing is gorgeous, beautiful, disturbing. Now, this entire book is populated with empty parking garages, modern architecture. Ballard was obsessed with architecture. He was obsessed with the functionality of modern architecture and the bleakness of empty parking lots, of towering parking garages, of motorways, of crisscrossing highways. All of this to him echoed in his heart, echoed in his soul. He, I believe, was influenced by an idea that the Situationists called psychogeography. The Situationists were a group of kind of surrealist-influenced Marxists in Paris, and they were led by an eccentric intellectual named Guy Debord. And one of their practices, psychogeography, was basically maneuvering through cities with no destination in mind, pulled by the magnetizing force of the buildings themselves, the kind of spirit of the buildings, if you will. And this spirit of modern architecture is very present in Ballard's works. Another book, Concrete Island, begins with a car crash in which a man flies off of the highway and lands into a kind of concrete ditch in between the highways. And although he's close, he can hear the cars, he can see them passing overhead, he's broken his leg and is unable to get back up. What comes next is pure surrealism. He wanders this kind of car graveyard and finds that he was not the first person to crash down there. There's skeletons in some of the cars of the unlucky, unfortunate souls who had crashed into this concrete island before. he goes on to discover he's not alone in this concrete island, and what follows in that book is a kind of nightmarish Robinson Crusoe. But the car crash is evident as an obsession of Ballard's in Concrete Island, which is another excellent book, and which I searched for with no success today. I know I owned it, but it's buried somewhere in the stacks of books that are my room. Crash has also been made into a film by David Cronenberg. Cronenberg, who tackles novels like these and attempts to make the unfilmable novels come to life on the screen. He did a great job with Burroughs' Naked Lunch, and he did an amazing job with Crash, starring James Spader and Holly Hunter. It's a fantastic movie. Unfortunately, it's been overshadowed by that garbage movie Crash, the one with Matt Dillon that ended up winning the Oscar a few years ago. Oh man, that was a real stinker. Unfortunately, when you Google Crash movie, that's what comes up, and not the far more disturbing, far more revolutionary adaptation of Burroughs' novel. This really got under people's skin. At one point, and I think this was before he had completed work on the novel Crash, he put on an exhibit. It was an art exhibit in which the pieces of art were these cars that had each been involved in fatal crashes. And that was it. No explanation, no thesis statement, it was just these mangled cars. And knowing that someone had died in each of these vehicles, it really upset people. And Ballard took a lot of heat for that. But he's never been interested in shying away from controversy. In fact, he's courted it. Ballard once described himself, and this work in particular, as a cautionary tale. And he said that on one hand, he was the man who's holding up a sign at a dangerous intersection saying, "Dangerous curves ahead, please slow down," while paradoxically being at the same intersection and holding up a sign saying, "Dangerous curves ahead, please speed up." The paradox is a tool that Ballard uses very effectively. We don't really know what he's saying in Crash. Is he warning us? Is he warning us of the dangers of excess? Is he warning us not to succumb to our darker impulses? Or is he kind of edging us on towards them? Is he sort of asking us to explore our own violence? Is he sort of daring us to explore our own hidden desires? The beauty of Ballard is he doesn't like to make a moral judgment. I mean, he describes the sex in this book almost clinically. And it makes sense because he at one point was studying medicine and very much enjoyed the autopsies. So when he describes the wounds suffered by these characters, it's almost like reading an autopsy, and that to me makes it more disturbing. You know, another writer that wrote really beautiful violence was Yukio Mishima, and I think that he and Ballard share a flair for description when it comes to describing snapped bones and torn meat and frayed sinews leaking blood, as if they were describing a beautiful flower or a wonderful tree or a sunset. I'm going to read another segment from Crash here that illustrates this point. In several of the photographs, the source of the wound was indicated by a detail of that portion of the car which had caused the injury. Besides a casualty ward photograph of a bifurcated penis was an insert of a handbrake unit. Above a close-up of a massively bruised vulva was a steering wheel boss and its manufacturer's medallion. These unions of torn genitalia and sections of car body and instrument panel formed a series of disturbing modules, units in a new currency of pain and desire. A new currency of pain and desire. That's what Ballard is really focused on, not just in Crash, but in lots of his works, like The Atrocity Exhibition, and even some of his later works like The Kindness of Women and Supercon. The sexuality is just a vehicle itself, getting us from point A to point B. Point A is the present, point B is the future. And if you think about the marriage that sex and technology have in our modern world, I mean, people have portable television screens on which they view pornography every day. I mean, that was really one of the main one of the main impetuses for the internet was pornography. So we've really moved ahead, technologically speaking, propelled in a sense by lust, our desire for more, our desire for sex. Ballard understood it. He didn't shy away from it. He was certainly not a Puritan. And if you're not of the weak stomach, and even if you are, I really recommend Crash. It's an incredible book, a book that will stay with you long after you've read the last page. I've read Crash at least 6 or 7 times in my life, and I'll read it another 6 or 7 or dozen more before I die if I get the chance. I like to try to read it every year, because even talking about it now, I find myself at loss for words. There's no clear roadmap to the territory Ballard's taking us. It's something you feel innately more than actually understanding on the page. And that kind of daring is exactly what makes him a fringe author. Although as a man, he was, I wouldn't say conservative, but he was very, very mild-mannered man. He lived in Shepperton. Shepperton's a suburb just outside of London, and that's where Ballard lived for most of his life. He was a family man. His wife died young, and I think that devastated him. That was the main inspiration for another one of his great books, The Atrocity Exhibition. I mentioned The Atrocity Exhibition in passing in our first episode on William S. Burroughs. I said that apart from Naked Lunch, The Atrocity Exhibition is probably the greatest work of experimental fiction that I've read. The Atrocity Exhibition focuses on a string of different obsessive points. It's fixated on celebrity. In one of the more famous sections of this book, called Why I Want to Fuck Ronald Reagan, Ballard is prophesizing a new kind of political figure, a new kind of president that's more celebrity than politician. I think that I don't need to say much on how prophetic that has turned out to be. A beautiful section about the Kennedy assassination is the Kennedy assassination as seen as a downhill motor car race. And this is actually sort of an ekphrastic work inspired by Alfred Jarry, who is a French playwright and kind of proto-surrealist. And he wrote a piece called The Crucifixion as a downhill bicycle race, in which, Judas is, biking along after Christ, and Christ is sort of going through the stations of the cross as if it were a bicycle race. In Ballard's vision, it's the assassination of JFK seen as a downhill race. Again, this garnered him a lot of negative press, and people found it to be in poor taste. But what he was really doing was looking at something through a different lens, through a different angle, and that's pure surrealism. Ballard was incredibly inspired by the surrealist painters who managed to create these beautiful landscapes that were really mirrors to their internal landscapes. And that's what Ballard's books are. They're psychopathological landscapes, not to be taken literally. So a book like Crash, he's not saying, hey, go out, drive dangerously, and masturbate as you careen into another car and blow up into 1,000 shards of glass and blood. He's not literally saying to do this. What he's saying is to understand that every human being is 90% submerged darkness, like an iceberg, like Hemingway's iceberg theory. The parts of us that we understand, even the parts of our own selves that we understand, are a small fraction of the animal that we really are. And that's a frightening idea. The Atrocity Exhibition, as I mentioned in my first video, was called by Will Self the zenith of the experimental novel in the English language. Will Self's someone who would know. He's a huge Burroughs fanatic, a huge Ballard fanatic. He looks at these two guys as his greatest inspiration. We'll get to Will Self in later videos, but if you'd like to check out one of his books just to get a head start, I really recommend Umbrella. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. There will be plenty more videos to come. And if you didn't like this video, just move on. There's more out there for you. Thank you for spending this time with me in this mass consensual hallucination known as the internet. And have a nice day out there in cyberspace.